The rusted gate did not want to open. Nina gripped the cold, flaking metal and shoved with her shoulder. Boots scraped, hinges shrieked. She pushed again, harder, until the iron gave way with a heavy, metallic groan. She stepped inside. Still air hung heavy. She trod the path. Every step was a sharp crunch that seemed too loud in the unnatural quiet. To her left, a row of red tulips stood in perfect, rigid lines. They did not sway, even though a light breeze brushed past her neck. She stopped to look at them, but they remained motionless, their petals tight and closed. She looked ahead. The path stretched forward, disappearing into a dense cluster of trees that blocked out the late afternoon sun. There was no sound of traffic, only the rhythmic sound of her own breathing and the crunch of stones. She kept moving, unaware that the silence was already beginning to shift. Nina stopped. The red tulips to her left were no longer still. Each petal pulsed with a soft rhythmic light, a steady glow that synchronized with her own heartbeat. She knelt on the grass, the damp earth soaking into her knees. One tulip leaned toward her, its stem curving with deliberate, finger-like precision. "Hello, Nina," the flower whispered. The voice was thin and dry, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. Nina froze, her breath catching in her throat. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the petal. It was warm, radiating a heat like a sun-baked stone. "Did you just talk?" she asked, her voice barely audible in the sudden stillness. The tulip shimmered, its deep red hue bleeding away into a brilliant polished gold. It stood taller, the light intensifying until it cast long, flickering shadows across the grass. "We only wake up for the kind," it replied. The words hung in the air, vibrating with a strange metallic resonance. Nina pulled her hand back, staring at the golden bloom. A second flower leaned forward, its stem bowing in perfect unison with the first. Its voice was higher, thinner, a sharp contrast to the dry leaf whisper of the golden bloom. "Follow the glow," it chimed. Nina looked down at the dirt path. A single spark of blue light flickered against the dark soil, then another, and another. The sparks connected, igniting into a continuous, snaking ribbon of luminescence that cut through the grass. It pulsed with a steady, inviting rhythm, winding its way deeper into the heart of the park. Nina remained on her knees, watching the blue trail snake around the base of a nearby bench. The light cast long, shifting shadows that danced against the tree trunks. She looked back at the golden tulip, then at the path ahead. The air felt charged, humming with a low-frequency vibration that made the hair on her arms stand up. She pressed her palms into the grass, pushed herself upright, and brushed the dirt from her knees. Her boots crunched on the gravel as she took the first step onto the glowing trail. The light flared brighter, reacting to her presence, and she began to walk, leaving the safety of the flower bed behind to follow the path into the unknown. The blue light pulled Nina deeper, winding around the base of a massive oak tree. As she passed, the tree did not remain passive. Its heavy, gnarled branches dipped low, sweeping across her shoulders like a slow, deliberate greeting. She felt the rough bark graze her skin, a tactile reminder that the park was watching her every move. She did not stop. She ducked beneath the swaying limbs, her boots finding rhythm on the soft earth. Above her, the air suddenly shimmered. A swarm of butterflies descended, their wings translucent and rigid, catching the dim light like shards of stained glass. They circled her head in a tight humming vortex, leaving behind a fine, glittering trail of silver dust that settled on her hair and skin. The path ahead shifted, the blue light brightening as if sensing her pace. She stepped over a protruding root that seemed to pulse with a faint, rhythmic heartbeat. The path narrowed, leading her toward the distant, still surface of the pond, and she quickened her stride, drawn forward by the park's unfolding transformation. The blue light ended abruptly at the edge of the water. Nina stood on the bank, her breath catching in her throat. The pond was a perfect dark mirror, reflecting the clouds above with such clarity that the horizon seemed to vanish. Not a single ripple disturbed the surface. She stepped closer, her boots sinking slightly into the damp moss. Suddenly, the water broke. A ripple spiraled outward from the center, and a duck emerged, its feathers radiating a soft, pulsing luminescence. It paddled toward her with deliberate, rhythmic strokes, the water parting around its glowing form like liquid glass. It stopped just inches from her toes, its head tilted at an inquisitive angle. Nina watched the light play across its wings. "You have found the heart of the park," the duck said. Its voice was clear, resonant, and carried an authority. Nina realized the stillness was not emptiness, but a reservoir of dormant power. She was a witness to the source of the park's awakening. The duck remained motionless, its glowing feathers casting a steady, rhythmic pulse across the dark water. Nina felt the air around her thicken, turning heavy and cool, as if the atmosphere itself were holding its breath. The silence was absolute,
lights. They
deeper than the quiet of the woods,
I don't care.
pressing
I am
against her
still
ears
mad
with a
at you.
physical weight. She felt a sudden, sharp pull toward the bank, a magnetic drag that forced her to sink down. She knelt on the damp, mossy earth, her knees pressing into the soil. Before her, the pond remained an unbroken sheet of obsidian. No breeze stirred the surface, no insect broke the tension. Yet, the water began to vibrate. A low, resonant hum rose from the depths, vibrating through the ground and into her palms. She watched the reflection of the clouds ripple. Nina leaned forward, her muscles coiled, her gaze locked on the center. Her fingers hovered just millimeters above the surface. Nina pressed her palm into the water. The surface did not ripple, it shattered. A blinding golden light erupted from the center, surging upward like a geyser of molten sun. The force of the release slammed into her chest, pushing her backward until she scrambled to regain her balance on the mud. The light did not fade. It expanded, a tidal wave of brilliance that tore across the pond and flooded the park. She watched, shielding her eyes, as the golden glow hit the flower beds. The tulips reacted instantly. Their stems thickened and shot upward, stretching toward the clouds with a sound like tearing paper. Buds that had been tight and closed burst open in a frantic, rhythmic sequence, revealing glowing petals that pulsed in time with the light. The surge reached the trees. Branches groaned, shifting and twisting as new leaves unfurled in seconds, turning the dark canopy into a shimmering ceiling of gold. The golden mist coalesced, spinning faster until the air itself seemed to liquefy. From the center of the swirling light, the butterflies erupted. They did not fly. They tore through the air, their wings like shards of stained glass reflecting 1,000 impossible colors. They circled Nina in a tight, frantic orbit, creating a vortex of light that blurred the horizon. The sound was a low, rhythmic thrumming, like 1,000 glass bells ringing in unison. Nina raised her hands to shield her eyes, but the brilliance bled through her fingers. The park was no longer a place of earth and wood. It was a living, breathing engine of color. She felt the ground tilt beneath her, the very foundations of the park shifting to accommodate the surge. The duck paddled through the chaos, its feathers glowing with a fierce, steady white light that cut through the kaleidoscope of the butterflies. It stopped at her feet, its gaze fixed on her. "The magic needs a witness," the duck said. Its voice carried over the roar. "You have provided that." Nina watched as the butterflies converged, their wings beating in a final, blinding energy. The blinding white heat snapped. In a heartbeat, the vortex of light collapsed, sinking into the earth like water into parched sand. The butterflies vanished, leaving only the scent of ozone and damp soil. Nina stood in the center of the clearing, her breath hitching in the sudden, heavy silence. The trees stopped their frantic swaying, their leaves settling into a dull, familiar green. The tulips bowed their heads, their stems losing their golden luster. The duck, now just a bird with ordinary feathers, paddled toward the reeds and disappeared into the shadows of the pond. Nina looked at her hands. They were trembling, the ghost of the warmth still clinging to her skin. She turned and began to walk. The gravel path crunched beneath her boots, a sharp, rhythmic sound that felt jarring after the roar of the magic. She reached the rusted gate. It stood slightly ajar, the hinges stiff. She pushed it open, stepped onto the concrete sidewalk, and felt the cool evening air hit her face. The transition was absolute. The city sounds returned a distant car engine, the hum of a street lamp, but they felt hollow, distant. She stopped and looked back one final time. The gate swung shut with a heavy, metallic thud, the latch clicking firmly into place. The park was just a park again, silent and still behind the iron bars. Nina turned toward the streetlights of her neighborhood. She walked with a steady pace, carrying the weight of the secret in her chest. The rhythm of her footsteps echoing against the pavement, carrying the quiet pulse of the park home.